Many regions and countries face severe food insecurity, but the problem is most prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. 31% of the continent's people are affected. In Nigeria, more than 14 million people are undernourished, and these numbers are astounding. Climate change and poor agricultural practices are exacerbating the problem. We can see this from the inadequate cereal harvest to the declining number of fish in the Niger Delta. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development points the way forward. Food and agriculture figure prominently in this vision. But this will require a major push. Governments need to adopt more ambitious policies and investment plans that focus not only on agriculture, but also on poverty, hunger, and resilience to climate change. We have the opportunity to end hunger within our lifetimes. This is one of the greatest legacies that we can leave to future generations. Let us continue working towards a world with zero hunger. Thank you for your support and commitment. Now, please enjoy the film. Thank you.
Food is life. Food is celebration. Food is culture. And food is found in everything we do, in all our ceremonies.
Food is a huge thing in Nigeria. I mean, most of our cultures and our traditions, births, deaths, celebrations of any and every sort involve food.
When you broker peace between two warring parties, you make them eat together from the same plate and drink together from the same cup.
Even how we show care and hospitality. Someone visits you, you don't offer them food or drink, it's a message.
Food is the center of community. It's everything. That's why in Nigeria, food is the core of our culture.
I think my favorite Nigerian dish has to be jollof rice.
It's pounded yam and banga soup fish.
When you take ofada rice with some liver in it and some really well-prepared fried meat, you can't beat that.
Eba or gari. Then when I take that with okra soup, man, I may as well be in heaven.
Pounded yam and egusi soup.
Gari, raw soup.
Ask any Nigerian who makes the best jollof rice, and you have a long animated discussion. It usually ends with Nigeria or Nigerian mothers crowned as champion. But ask what may happen when there's no rice or tomato to make jollof, and you may be met with silence. Food security is reliable access to sufficient, edible nutrition.
We will be well over 400 million. It is mind-boggling.
Traditional farming has been overwhelmed by changing weather patterns, out-of-date methods, and a significant increase in the demand for food. For decades, gaps in production have been countered by food imports.
It became daily easier to import than to produce. So agriculture died. And so virtually everything we earned from oil simply went to service importation.
A drastic drop in oil incomes since 2014 and near 50% devaluation of the naira highlighted the risk of dependence on external sources. But replacing imports with local production to save foreign exchange presents a challenge. Much needs to be done if long-term food insecurity is to be avoided.
Education, it's an all-time low. So, I mean, it's got a huge population of young people under 25. Infrastructure is also a really big issue. It's been destroyed over the last few years. Climate change is even bigger. Coming together, that's sort of like your perfect storm.
By far the biggest challenge is the quality of infrastructure between the rural areas where the food is grown and where the food is mostly consumed, which is in the urban areas and in the cities and in the state capitals. Perishable food spends 3 to 4 days trying to get somewhere where it should be consumed.
We have about 40% post-harvest losses in the country. Why should this happen? In a country where there's some people looking for food.
They can't store the food because they don't have the electricity and storage systems where the farmlands are.
Farmers still do things manually, and it's hard to be efficient farming that way.
The climate change is affecting agriculture already in this country. Farmers are not sure when the rainy season starts and when it ends. And if you don't know when the rains are going to come, when they're going to stop, it affects the planting and harvesting cycles. So that's a big challenge to our farmers.
It rains heavily, and all the water goes into the Atlantic Ocean. Every raindrop that enters the stream is finding its way to the rivers and out into the ocean. Now, the ocean doesn't need more water. We need it.
With irrigation, we can move from one to multiple harvests per year.
We can't keep doing things the same way. At the rate our population is growing, if we continue as is in terms of farming and making sure we produce enough food, we're never going to have enough.
The farmer must be willing to relent. They must understand the fact that it's not like farming that was done in the past. Farming has changed.
The challenges facing us as a country and as a region are humongous. And fundamentally, we have no time, because reality is population is going up. And then land is actually coming out of the system due to erosion, salinization, desertification, and urbanization also impacts that as well. The farmer of today in Nigeria is a smallholder farmer, and fundamentally the farmer of tomorrow is going to be that smallholder farmer.
The smallholder farmers have to have a way to make money off of whatever farming industry ends up happening in rural areas. Otherwise, you're going to have massive unrest and massive inequality. Nigeria is already a country that has huge amounts of inequality, where the top 1% own the vast majority of the wealth. I think agriculture is an opportunity for us to get that right.
Smallholder farmers do not have access to the cash to pair with their hard work to buy the quantity and quality of inputs to be successful. We are able to deploy a system where we're able to raise debt to support thousands of smallholder farmers and do it in a financially sustainable way.
Gaskiya kamun zuwa babban gona zuwa ka nemi bashi ba wani abu ne wanda ba kowa zai tsaya baka ba.
As a financing institution, reality is that you often see a lot of risk in smallholder farmers. And the truth is there are risks, but those risks can be mitigated, as has been seen by the fact that we've been able to, over the last 6 years, achieve a repayment rate of 99.99%.
Kamun zuwa babban gona ba na noma buhu 5 nawa, amma kuma bayan zuwan ta ina iya buhu 20 zuwa 30 yanzu.
Egusi soup is like a creamy melange of nuts and greens, and it's almost always surf and turf. So you have quite fishy elements from crayfish, and then you have the meats, sometimes which could be beef, chicken, slightly fishy, full of leafy greens. Egusi is a perfect match.
The fundamental challenge holding back the agriculture sector in this region is low level of farm productivity. A farmer in Nigeria has to be able to compete with a farmer in other parts of the world. And if you look at the key staples that we produce, a farmer in Nigeria is getting yields that are 20% of farmers in other regions.
We're producing less and less of our staples: rice, maize, tomatoes. And you've got climate change breathing down our backs, and it's affecting rainfall. And over the last 20 years, we've seen our yield drop by 45%.
That as of 1986, over 50% of the Nigerian soil was not fertile for growing.
Soils do die. You keep growing food on them. And chemical fertilizers may help, but they can also destroy the soil because they're actually a form of salt. You know what they're doing now? They go to your farm, take the microbes from your soil, separate the bad ones from the good ones, and multiply your microbes and put back in the soil. So you can actually correct soil.
A lot of the seeds that you find in the country, they're not able to produce at optimal capacity. We bring them into the lab and we utilize something called tissue culture. We clean the seeds, and what that does is ensures that, okay, a seed is not able to give us the maximum yield.
When you're talking about mechanization, everybody thinks of large scale. One thing that helped tremendously is hand planters. It's amazing how much it helped, Because now they can plant the right spacing, they can plant the right depth, and they can plant lots of rows a day without bending over, poking holes, and planting by hand.
Jollof rice has always been that celebratory dish. It has flavor. It has just a hint of spice. It has rice, most importantly, that can stand up to the sauce. So the important thing with jollof rice is having a good balance between the rice and the tomato sauce it's cooked in. You don't have a pot of mush. You have individual, lovely, separate, fluffy, vibrantly colored grains of jollof rice. Nigerian jollof for the win.
Why should we produce tomatoes that go to waste? Because we don't know how to process them.
Nigeria is the largest importer of tomato paste in the world. In terms of the actual volume of tomato paste, it could fill the Empire State Building twice. The average yield in Nigeria for tomatoes is about 5 to 7 tons per hectare. The global average yield is about 35 tons per hectare. The factory needs to buy tomatoes at a cost of, let's say, $80 to $100 a ton. But Nigerians can't produce at that cost. It costs them $120 to $130 to make the tomatoes. A lot of people think that yield is solely determined by the variety, but actually there's a lot that goes into it. Plant spacing, irrigation, fertilizer application, seed variety, and pesticides are all important parts of helping the farm to be healthy and productive. We've had 3 seasons now, and every year we've doubled our yields.
You know, Nigeria has the potential to be a major rice producer. If you look at today, the largest rice producer in the world is Thailand. Thailand sits between 4 degrees and 14 degrees north of the equator. Nigeria sits exactly in that same band.
The cost of production for foreign rice is a lot less than the cost of production for Nigerian rice.
A lot of rice is manually harvested, and constantly when it's manually harvested, you get grains of stone, you get debris, you get dirt in it.
It's one area that government has focused policy recently to try and reduce or eliminate the importation of rice.
The standards have increased as a result of the work they have done. So that has produced very good quality rice. We can definitely produce enough rice to feed the whole nation.
I want to tell you, I say, Abakaliki rice, no be waiting it be before where it be now. Today, no more stone in our rice. Our rice is stone-free, horse-free, and well-packaged.
In Nigeria, we actually import more wheat than we do rice.
Nigeria eats lots of bread. They need lots of wheat. Wheat production in the past in Nigeria has been mainly in the north. Borno, which was a major state, which probably had close to 400,000 hectares of wheat. Well, with the Boko Haram situation, no wheat is being grown.
About 3 years ago, the best wheat in Nigeria was yielding around 1.5 tons per hectare. Then an organization called ICARDA, they brought some excellent new wheat varieties that increased the yield from 1.5 tons to 4 or 5 tons. At those yield levels, wheat becomes very profitable.
If this new wheat varieties come about, you'll see that they can grow wheat like rice, and you'll see the stop importation of wheat.
Catfish pepper soup in Nigeria is known as point and kill. And then they make this incredibly fragrant broth of pepper soup that's seasoned with peculiar African or indigenous spices. And you just end up with this beautiful dish of creamy fish cut by spicy broth.
Fish is the primary source of protein for the majority of people who live in the Niger Delta.
Fishermen on the coastal waters are not only being confronted with the impacts of global warming and salinization of freshwater systems. That means the marine ecosystem is being impacted by intrusion of seawater into freshwater system. That affects both the quality of the types of species we have They're also affected by the high level of ecosystem degradation from oil pollution. People in the past would just go to the coastline, go to the mangroves and harvest them and have very healthy foods. Now all that is being challenged. Apart from that, even the periwinkles grow a lot in the mangroves, and periwinkles are very essential in the food system.
Madam Periwinkle was a very big woman in terms of periwinkle business. But today, you cannot see periwinkle again.
They manage my periwinkle company to do my own job, train my pikin, build my house, buy my lapa, do everything. It's the best company in this world. Before, modern, everywhere. That poto when you do come, we know they go far, you just enter that side. Take your 2 hands, pack them. As this thing, don't pour the oil, no periwinkle again. If you enter that poto, you can't see even one.
Now the firewood are completely gone. Though it is firewood that you use in drying the fish. No mangrove again, because all the mangrove are completely dead.
We need to adopt new and sustainable approaches to produce fish to meet demand.
Aquaculture is a huge opportunity for Nigerians. We can meet our demand with investing in fisheries.
Nigeria requires over 2.6 million metric tons of catfish, and the current production capacity here in Nigeria is above 40%, which means the market is there. The market is there, but the major problem is the high cost of production.
Fish production requires a cold chain. It requires energy, it requires electricity, and we just don't have that.
Fish farming can be a profitable business, but to get started, somebody needs, first of all, some clean water.
We should have reservoirs all along the streams. Fresh water. We have molecular filter now. It filters only pure water onto the reservoir.
The most expensive thing in fish farming is the feed, especially if you go and buy the imported feed. So a lot of people now are looking into how do I produce my own feed. And yeah, we have some formulas. The employment that will be created because you buy the fish food here in Nigeria. Farmers will have to increase their production of maize and soybean to make the fish food. Everything starts coming together.
Suya in Nigerian street food, it's one of those things that cuts across every class in society. Every city and every town in Nigeria now has multiple suya joints. It's just that street food answer to a late evening, to grabbing a snack. Suya is the ultimate.
According to the Nigerian Ministry of Agriculture, Lagos State is the largest consumer of Nigerian beef, 95% of which is raised by nomadic herdsmen in the north who often walk cattle thousands of kilometers to slaughter in the market. But a way of life is not always the most effective way to feed a nation. Land is scarce. Farmers and herdsmen often clash with deadly consequences.
Nature can no longer provide water and pasture for livestock.
Land and population have come together and caused the issues between pastoralists and farmers. Desertification has compounded and exacerbated those issues.
The grasslands of Nigeria can barely support maybe about 40% of Nigerian livestock. Because of expanding cultivations, climate change, degradation of the rangelands have all depleted the grassland resources that Nigeria used to have.
Climate change is having an effect. Once it dries up and the rain stops, cattle begin to move in from West Africa into Nigeria. It doesn't happen here alone. It happens in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana. I'm asking people to grow food, right? And I'm asking the herdsman, okay, grow your cattle. We need your milk and your beef. But one department of agriculture doesn't have to become a problem for another.
This system of just moving cattle around the country or around the entire West African region, around the Sahel, is not sustainable in the long run.
There is crisis, there is land shortages, there is growing social anxiety, and there is growing social disorder that is negatively affecting the system of production.
It used to be the farmer only farmed in the rainy season. So in the dry season, he wanted the cattle to eat up his crops and place the manure on the ground, and it made it easier for him to farm. But today, they're farming year-round, so this is no longer viable.
We can't keep up with the demand of the growing population at the rate at which we produce cattle.
The country eats over 18,000 head of beef a day.
So we need to do something radically to change our cattle production and transform it from an industry is dependent on methods that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. We consume a lot of milk, 1 billion liters every year.
If you ask those in Lagos, they probably have never taken fresh milk all their life. They are only used to milk that comes in can, either in powder form or in liquid form.
We don't produce 2% of the milk requirement of the Nigerian population.
But if we can improve that infrastructure that links the milk producer and the market, then of course the preference and the consumption of fresh milk will increase with it.
The local breeds can produce up to about 1 liter a day. Your average Holstein Friesian cow will give you a milk yield of up to 50 liters a day. To get higher production from your cattle, you need to feed them well.
The solution to solve this problem is to bring in feedlots, to where Fulani can sell their cattle in 18 months at twice the weight, have 60% less cattle running on the grass, and now that all takes feed, which the farmer is going to provide. It's a win-win situation. It has to come to Nigeria.
If you want to feed a single cow, you need 2 acres of land for 1 year. But with the same acre of land, you set up a part where they can grow their grasses in just 7 days. Using fodder system, you can feed over 10,000 cows. So you grow them in layers such that when it is time for harvest, you just roll it off, take it to the feeding area for the animals and drop it, and you are done.
Rico Gado in Yola is trying to change the way cattle are fed.
We're presenting you with the proper way of feeding an animal, rather than just feed the animal whatever you have available to feed it. Not only are we less expensive than other foreign brands, we are as competitive in terms of quality.
So we have 19.5 million cows in this country, roughly. The idea is that you should have groups of ranches, which will now change to be a production center. 10, 20, 50, 30 ranches in one large community, so we can provide them security against rustlers, but also supply them water and harvest milk and process the milk.
Have these cow owners rent a ranch. So we have a segment where the cows are staying. Then you set up a part where they can grow their grasses in just 7 days, the fodder system. And all of this together, you actually have your hospitals where you have your vet doctors to check the cows. It would have been able to solve the issue of the herdsmen and the farmers' clashes. 2, it will create employment. Our meat quality will be better because now we have health inspectors ensuring, with the abattoirs in that place. In addition, the owners of the fodder system are able to get job, create income for themselves. Over time, you bring in schools and all of that, such that you are able to create a whole new source of income for the nation.
I assure you that there is no pastoral family that will move his animals away from an area where there are pasture and there is water to anywhere else. Help farmers improve productivity, help pastoralists improve productivity within the same environments, share the benefits and share the resources. In this way, we are creating symbiotic relationship and great social harmony among the diverse communities that live in each of Nigeria's rural areas.
The nations that are very rich happens to be the ones that process and add value to everything they produce. Well, the ones that are poor tends to be the ones that are stuck at the bottom of the value chain. They export raw materials, they don't finish the products that they produce. And so I really believe that for agriculture to be totally transformed, we must totally have agricultural industrialization. So we shouldn't be focusing just on production. We should focus on developing full value chains for everything that we do. The food processing companies are located in the cities. I've been advocating for a total structural transformation of our rural economy through what I call staple food crop processing zones, where you will give incentives for the food and agribusinesses to locate in rural areas. They will have access to infrastructure, power, water, roads, and ICT infrastructure and irrigation. Then those areas become areas where they actually buy massive amount of produce from farmers. They create markets for farmers. They process and add value to everything there in the rural economy. And the only thing that you will find leaving those rural economies will be finished products.
Youth in Nigeria basically have a negative attitude about going into agriculture and going into farming. And they're right. They're exactly right. You look at their parents or their grandparents and how they were doing agriculture. It's not a great life. It's poverty, it's hard work.
And so what you're seeing is that youths en masse are migrating from rural areas to urban areas.
It may seem that youth are not interested in agriculture at the moment. It's basically because the way it's been practiced over the years and the way it's been, tutored down to us.
We just thought about agriculture as production. Are we producing more? We didn't think about when we produce, how do we process? How do we add value to what we produce? How do we market?
There are huge potential there and huge opportunity for young people to find a job.
I think with such a young population in Nigeria, if we invest in that, the sky's the limit.
Commercial farms need engineers, accountants, office managers, mechanics. I mean, the entire gamut of professional opportunities arise there. You don't have to even own a farm. You can make bags. You can have a plastic factory. You can supply fertilizers. You can start a tractor hire service. You can market people's products for them.
Start a seed company to provide high-quality seed to farmers. Set up an agro dealership in 100 small villages. There's all kinds of things that businesses can be set up to make the food system in Nigeria efficient. And all the great things that are happening to improve the nutrition and the health and the employment of people is making everybody have better incomes too.
The size of the food and agriculture market on this continent by 2030 is going to be a whopping $1 trillion. That tells me that the future millionaires and the billionaires of Africa are not going to come from oil and gas industry. They're going to come from the agriculture sector. But they're going to come from a sector that focuses on agriculture as a business, not as a way of life.
I was trained as a doctor to be a cardiologist, but here I am as a farmer, and a proud one at it. It's a profitable business. It's something that brings me joy, that creates opportunities for people in the rural environment, and also creates opportunity for my investors as well.
We are young people from all varieties of professions making agriculture a business.
Lots of young people in Nigeria with great ideas need to begin to look at food as an opportunity for the future. Growing food, urban farming, creative farming.
And one of the things we can do for ourselves as individuals is ensure we adopt urban farming to ensure that we can produce our foods right in the city as opposed to waiting for kilometers and miles away to bring the food down to the city. Hunger is not seasonal, so food production cannot be seasonal. Or soilless technology generally, you can grow crop any time of the year. You can maximize your space. You can do without the use of insecticide, herbicide.
Our first success was with yam for the aeroponics. We're able to do it for 200 different other crops. Tomatoes in soil normally take 90 days. We do it in about 35 to 45 days. So aeroponics reduces the time to harvest. Through our agricultural technologies, we have higher rates of flavonoids and antioxidants, especially our crops grown in the aeroponic systems. So aside from ensuring food security and food self-sufficiency, we also want to ensure that the food people are eating is actually healthy.
When you have the plant in a aeroponic system, when you are growing without the soil element, the plants do not compete for nutrients. You can jam pack them as close as possible, such that they only need space for growth. When you are growing in soil, you can only have one layer of plant growing. But when you are growing without soil, you can have multiple layers because all you need to do is create multiple support structures. The screenhouse has the aeroponic system in place that has about 11,000 plantlets. The capacity of that in the next 8-9 months is 3 million tubers coming out of there. With this partial evaporator system, we are able to cool the greenhouse to whatever temperature we want it to go to. So this works like a normal cooling system. However, the cold air produced here is pushed into the greenhouse through the ventilation systems that we have put inside, and all the materials used are locally made.
Fresh Direct is an urban farm. We use technology and agriculture, so we wanted to think about doing greenhouse farming in the city, and we realized that the space is not enough for the amount that we want to produce. And so we were trying to think of what is stackable, and we decided, hey, we'll do hydroponic farming in containers rather than doing them in the greenhouses that we had. We went from having just 1 container to 2 containers to now we have 10 containers that we're fabricating right now. We're able to give the plant the best of everything that it needs, but we're also able to control the light that it gets, the nutrients that it gets, and make sure that it's optimum. It's just like a child. When you have a child, you feed it the best, you give it the best, your child grows up to be big and healthy. The same thing with our plants.
Women are an integral part of any strategy for food security.
Well, women today are involved in agriculture. In Nigeria, those that do the back-breaking work are our women.
Women do end up playing quite a big role in terms of the labor that goes into farm work. It's unfortunate that despite the fact that they contribute so much to the work, they don't necessarily get to decide what happens to the money.
So you cannot go far unless you have empowerment of women, especially in the agricultural sector.
Everything we plan for agriculture, we must think of the role of women because they are the center of production, of processing of many of our crops.
As we are modernizing, as we're becoming more aware of the effect of food production in the environment and climate change, is take women along with you.
We are mobilizing $3 billion at the African Development Bank, specifically for the businesses of women in Africa. So get women issues right in agriculture, get the youth issues right, get the structure of agriculture right in the rural economy, get the private sector to invest in it, and at the end of it, get the lenses, the right lenses, look at it as a business for creating massive amount of wealth.
To be food secure, we must be climate resilient. There is no time. We must ensure that every person, every day, no matter who or where, is guaranteed safe, sufficient, and nutritious meals.
It's a shame that we import so much of our food. We've relied so heavily on the money that we've made as a country from oil and from petroleum. And so the solution really is to be self-sufficient.
Nigeria needs to act immediately to address the challenges of food security. My major concern and worry is whether we will act the right way.
If we continue with the low productivity approaches we have now, then we're going to have serious problems. But we are totally capable of feeding ourselves.
I think a holistic approach to it, that it's not just about producing food, it's a full cycle. And so therefore, is the infrastructure there? Do we have access? Are the markets there? Are women involved in this? Is there education being brought in a way that empowers people so that we get the maximum use from it? I think that's been the major challenge. It's not joined up.
You cannot always wait for the government to do things. The people that you call government, they have tenure, but being a citizen of Nigeria is a life thing. So except the majority is willing to change, nothing would happen. The government is not going to help you ensure that you do not waste food in your houses. The government is not going to help you ensure that you do things that are pro-environment. It is only us that can do that. We live in a country where we throw dirt on the street and complain that the government did not pick it up.
But we need to start now and start looking at it seriously as an opportunity, something that actually gives value to society, that solves the country's most fundamental problems as a generational mission, because that's what it is. It's a big, big challenge for this generation.
For us to protect our ecosystem, to tackle global warming, to keep our food diversity, we need to support agriculture that works in harmony with nature.
The weather, the land, the people, the water, it's all here. All we have to do is put it together and make it happen.
If we will be sober, sensible, and consistent in keeping and paying attention to food security, we do what we should do, starting from now, we can do it.
Musa Yaradua Center in Abuja. Did you all get your copies of the first film that they did, Nowhere to Run, in your bags? Okay, because I went and I asked them, and they very generously donated copies in Hausa language, and you should find one in every bag. So it gives me great pleasure to invite the panelists. I'll start with the moderator, who did a fantastic job yesterday. I'm sure you'll all agree. The fans have started again. Wanna stop paying people. Please join me in giving a wonderful, wonderful welcome to Wana Odobang, all the way from Lagos. So I have to get this protocol thing right. Do I introduce the commissioner first? First. Okay. Right. Sorry, I just had to clarify because we have government in our midst today. And I haven't actually met the Commissioner for Agriculture from Kaduna State before, but I've spotted him now. But I sent some equally powerful people to help me convince him to come and join us on this panel today. So please, I really appreciate you being here, sir. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Manzo Maigari to the stage. Thank you, sir. I should also, I don't know, I've got this whole protocol thing wrong. Just forgive me. At K Festival, we are sports, we don't know protocol and seniority. So the next person I'm going to invite is the Deputy Ambassador, the Deputy EU Ambassador to Nigeria and ECOWAS. And we have him here today because they were instrumental to the making of this film. They funded it very generously. Please welcome Richard Young to the panel. And next, I would like to invite my sister. She's my sister's sister. She's the sister of the person that I call Yaya. Yes. An expert in this area, and we thought it would be wonderful to be able to hear her voice. So please join me in welcoming Madam Furera Isma Jumari. So you'll notice there's a young man I've left to last here. And the reason is that this is very emotional for me. You know, I've told you many times that I was a teacher in my previous life. And, well, I'm trying. I'm always learning. And one of the students that taught me the most in my life, in my career as a teacher, was a young man that I met while I was a deputy principal at Regent Secondary School in Abuja. I was the deputy principal for 3 years. But there was this particular student that I used to teach English and drama. And we got really close because I'd never known a student who was so driven, who understood where there were issues, but who made such a huge effort to succeed. And when his IGCSE results came out, I'm sure I was even prouder than his mom. And we still keep in touch. And it's been fascinating watching him and seeing his progress on social media. And he's now one of the most successful farmers in Kebbi State. Please join me in welcoming my son, which is what I've always called him, Haruna Hassan Tukur. Can we do a quick mic check, please? Your mic is there, sir? Yeah. You got your mic? Oh, great. Okay. Is it working?
Thank you to all our incredible panelists for being here. I think I'm going to start with Richard. First of all, what made you and the EU decide to be part of this film? And what's your take on all the things that we discovered so far?
I think there were, whenever you make a decision to do anything, there's lots of different reasons floating around. But I think the main motivation here came from our work with Yaradua on their film Nowhere to Run, which I believe you've all got in your bags. We helped promote that film. We helped promote the translation into Igbo, into Pidgin, into Hausa, this is what you've got today. But when we completed all that work, we thought, well, what do we do next? And I think it was apparent from our discussions with people that there was a big issue of food security that was arising from this climate change issue. We could see that the climate change issue, in some sense, was squeezing Nigeria. In the north, you have the desertification and you have the effect of climate change. Then in the south, you have the rising sea level. So we see this squeeze from the top and from the bottom, as it were. And at the same time, we had all this news about the population growth. And as the former president Obasanjo said in the film, the sort of mind-boggling numbers that we have Nigeria heading towards 400 to 500 million people over the next 20 or so years. It's sort of growing at a rate of roughly 5 million people a year. That's the population of Ireland every single year, or the population of Denmark every single year. Soon Nigeria will have the same population as the whole of the European Union. So not only is it getting squeezed from the north and squeezed from the south, it's getting squeezed in the center, as it were, because the population is growing. With all of that challenge, there's going to be an issue of food security. And that issue of food security is furthermore compounded if we look at the prospects for the petroleum market in the future and the declining demand, I think, that will exist for hydrocarbons, et cetera, because of climate change issues. So all these squeezings makes you think, well, we've got an issue of food security. So the idea of that issue was then combined with the fact that the government's trying to promote agriculture. So it all came together. And I have to say, we had some money.
Well, we're happy you put the money to good use. Haruna, I wanted to ask you, as a farmer, do those issues reflect your reality?
Yes, actually, they do. Yes, they do, actually. One thing I have to make mention of here is that we've mentioned of infrastructure, we've made mention of mechanization, we've made mention of erosion and so many other things. But one thing that we've left out is that the farmer, the local farmer, you need to educate him. Agriculture has evolved into something that is not what we're practicing today in Nigeria. And the local farmers, they have no idea of this. One example that I want to give you is that the local farmer doesn't know the size of his farm. And it's a determining factor of how many seeds you need to plant, how many tons of fertilizer you need on that farm, and it's going to define as well how much output you get out of that land. And these farmers, they don't actually have an idea of the numbers of hectares. So it's one thing I think we've missed out of from this presentation, which I want to clarify here.
Madam Ferreira, I want to go to you. Just banking off what he's said about in terms of this disconnect. You've been a consultant in development and agriculture and worked for different agencies as well. And in your experience in working with certain agencies, why is there still a disconnect? We know these things, we know some of these issues, but then nothing has changed.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to start by giving an example. I was on a field trip in Accra, Ghana in 2007. This is a Ghanaian example, but it reflects what is happening. During the field trip, we had a meeting with the Cocoa Board. They gave us all the glamorous things they were doing in agriculture with cocoa, talked about fair trade. We went to the field, met with the farmers, and I was excited, especially I wanted to know, the impact of fair trade on the farmers. I was shocked. Many of the farmers didn't know what I was talking about when I mentioned fair trade. So there's always that disconnect. And that's why, borrowing from Kenna, that says she hates globalization, I'm beginning to hate hearing statistics, numbers, this, that. There's always a disconnect. And I think it's about whatever is done up there with policies and programs. Now, this is my own opinion, possibly in Nigeria. These numbers, even if it's by way of research, you get statistics, you have numbers in terms of, for example, number of farmers that really need to be educated, blah, 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 does not underpin whatever policy decisions are taken or whatever programs and projects are going to be implemented. And that's what I think is happening. So there is often a disconnect. And yes, the local farmers need to be educated. Culture and tradition is difficult to change. Many of these farmers have grown learning what their forefathers have been doing, their farm practices, whatever agronomical practices. They continue with that regardless of climate change, for example, regardless of so many things. But the important thing is guiding them. We used to have extension workers, but I will leave that out. But the important thing is guiding them, sensitizing them, educating them on new farm practices, simpler tools that they can use that don't cost too much. And I think we can't just leave them to their devices. They need to be guided. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Megari, I'm going to ask you two questions. I think the first one is really, again, about, we talked about the disconnect and how farmers need to be trained. Looking at your own constituency, are there any in the film?
Basically, nature endows people with knowledge to adapt. And therefore, if you look at even early civilizations, you find out that people, based on their knowledge of the immediate environment, they developed technologies that ensured that they survived and were sustainable. But generally, with the growth of the population, climate change, and the likes, you find out that change is occurring at a rate that is so fast that our farmers cannot easily adapt. And therefore, there is the need to bring research and development to bear on that. And I'm just going to say one or two things. First, I think what is most important here is that we look at creating an enterprise in farming. And when you talk about creating an enterprise in farming, you find out that you have a list of needs that require to be put in place. And looking at it critically, you find out that that is completely missing in this environment. And the first is the standardization of farm practices. You will find out that we have farmers that are smallholder farmers that operate in the informal economy. They are largely ignorant and financially exclusive. And therefore, it becomes difficult to even reach out to them, even when you have interventions to make. And therefore, what do you need to do? As I said, first, if you standardize farm practices, a farmer understands that, okay, what he's doing is a business. And then you begin to look at the first port of call, which is clusterization. We cannot run away from our realities. Our reality is that our farmers are smallholder farmers, and operating individually as silos, they are not viable, and they cannot be, their practices cannot be sustainable. So the best thing that you have to do is to cluster them. When you cluster them, then you can bring value addition. You know, but before you get there, what benefits do you get from clusterization? The benefits of clusterization is, first, interventions become easy to do. Two, capacity building. Then peer review, sharing of ideas. And then thirdly, they become visible to investors. If I tell you that, today I have 10,000 farmers producing 7 million metric tons of maize in Kaduna State, and I want him to put money there, for example, what data do I have? They are not visible. I have to have the critical mass with data that convinces him to say, okay, look, I'm going to come and have a look at this. Another thing, as I said, is critical is infrastructure. You share infrastructure. You share common services that make the cost, that bring down the cost of production, other than having each farmer 10 kilometers away. You know, like my friend from Europe used to make jest of me. He says we have handkerchief-sized farms, and that's why when herdsmen are roaming around and they just see the farm, when they get to a farm, it is not visible, and they just overrun it. And it's the reality. Our farms are so small and scattered. If we have clusters, there is so much value that is going to come to it. And then you look at infrastructure, which is the very, very, very baseline. When we talk about infrastructure in agriculture, it's beyond the light and all that you see. We have hard infrastructure as well as soft infrastructure. And when you want to talk about soft infrastructure, you are looking at building the capacities of farmers. I want to just make an example with two commodities like maize and tomatoes. Kaduna State is the largest producer of these two commodities in Nigeria, yet our productivity is still very poor. Why is it so? Because farmers have not seen a business in what they are doing. And therefore, when you bring high-yielding varieties of seeds or seedlings for maize or tomatoes, the farmers don't think it is necessary to buy because they can see a market for it. There are times when a basket of tomatoes is 300 naira, and there are times the same basket of tomatoes is 50,000 naira. And therefore, we have to go beyond the rhetoric and get to the real core of the matter to resolve these issues. So, and there's another thing I'm also looking at is, if you build the capacity of farmers, there are times that farmers can harvest tomatoes, good timing, and the tomatoes can stay on the shelf for 2 weeks, even without any cold storage. So all these are things that we have not taken time to look at, because we just feel and we walk in the error of believing that Nigeria is such a rich country, agriculture doesn't matter, but the truth about it is that we have no future outside agriculture.
Haruna, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about investment. As a farmer and as someone who also works with other farmers as well, what are the challenges? We hear about infrastructure, we hear about investment so much, but clearly there's still some issues and some challenges. And I want to know from your perspective what those main specific challenges are, and why we aren't getting more investment into farming.
All right. I think some of the challenges we have as farmers is that the federal government have made a lot of efforts to provide incentives for farmers, but the question is, are these farmers, the real farmers, getting this money? So one thing that I've figured is that, because I'm working with 200 farmers this raining season in Kebbi State, is that we went to the district heads and then we told them to give us real farmers, and we're going to hold you accountable if we don't get the real farmers and you provide us with proxies. So this is one thing. The second thing is that the government is giving subsidization on fertilizer, but you've not gone to the farms, you don't know how many bags of fertilizer are in it per hectare. I have a 10 hectare, you're giving me 2 bags of fertilizer. There's no need for that. I have a 0.5 hectare, you're giving me 5 bags of fertilizer. It's a waste. So these are challenges that we're facing as farmers, as well as a farmer now. I don't know when the raining season is. For instance, for this year, it has changed. I have no idea when to start. We're working based on predictions. Oh, it rained today. I'm going to run to the farm tomorrow to plant. And then we go to the farms. It does not rain for the next 2 weeks, and we are losing seeds. Another thing is that we're not being provided with prices, are not being controlled. I have over 55 hectares of farms of maize right now that I've planted. I have no idea how much I'm going to sell it at the end of the season. So it's a major challenge.
So you're not getting any support in terms of, all the issues that you've just raised at all?
No, I don't think so. Yes, there is a support from the CBN with the Uncle Borough, with NASA, but what I am saying is that these farmers, are they getting this right equipment? Even with the NASA, we have a problem in some places whereby the inputs do not get to the farmers in time. So you need to apply your fertilizer 4 weeks after you planted. It's not there. You need your seeds before a certain season. It's not there. Another thing that I want to make you understand is that now we have adopted the irrigation system, especially in Kebbi State. And then when you look at it, during the ending of the year, we're always having fuel crisis. So during that time is when we start the rainy season, the dry season farming, excuse me. If you go down to my village in Yauri local government, you'll be having fuel scarcity all over the country around that area, around that time. So you get to buy 1 liter of fuel, about 250 naira. So you need that fuel, of course, to fuel your generators to do your irrigation. So there are things that these farmers are not getting much support to continue with the irrigation farming. So that's why rice is still very expensive. Nigerian-made rice is still very expensive because of the high cost of production. And then the level of mechanization as well is very, very low. And then when you bring in mechanization into farming, you bring the cost down, and that's when we're going to start having lower prices of rice and food all over the country. So these are the challenges that we need to look into, and as well as youths need to be involved in agriculture. So how do you make youths get into agriculture? You have to market it to them. You have to show them that agriculture has changed. Agriculture is not what you think of it as hoe and cutlass. So agriculture now has gone beyond what you think. You can practice a lot of things. I've been to Turkey just earlier this year. I've seen someone that owns a 450 hectare of farm just like mine, and he's running it, just him and his son, with the access of mechanization. And another thing is that the youths are more likely to adapt all these new technologies that we've just watched, whereby the older generation, they're used to what they're doing, and it is hard for them to adapt with all these coming changes. So I think the youths are the way forward to changing all these problems we have.
Thank you. Richard, you mentioned climate change. The film did mention climate change, of course, and we know how much climate change impacts food security. We talked about desertification in the north, and there's a lot of flooding in the south as well. But I often also feel like climate change is one of those conversations that happen at very higher levels, and even sort of the average Nigerian does not realize how it affects their food and food prices, and how expensive their food is, and how it's going to pinch their pockets as well. What are we doing? Or what, in your opinion, what do we need to do to start to get everybody involved and understanding the impact and the effect of climate change on their food and in the agricultural sector as well?
Well, that's a heavy question for so early in the morning.
Okay, we'll give you some tea afterwards.
I don't know. On the whole climate change issue, I think there is a public debate out there. I mean, if I listen to the radio, if I read what's in the newspapers, and I hope what's happening in town hall meetings, I think there's much wider acceptance that this is an issue that's before people. And I think, all the different disputes and conflicts that are taking place in Nigeria whether it's in the Niger Delta or whether it's in, you know, herder farmers clashes. I think people are, I think, acutely aware of that impact, and when you combine that with the population, I think people become, you know, even more aware. I mean, it's a task before all of us in terms of putting that out there. You know, the real issue is how do you deal with it? And this is what this film is about. You know, we have this challenge of food security, and what can we do about this challenge of food security? Now, if you look at historically, and I'm talking about millennia here, you know, how have people dealt with food? Okay, when I sort of started reading a little bit about this, I thought, well, there's actually three things people have done to actually have more food. One is cooking. Okay, another one is agriculture, and the third one is, you know, preservation and processing of food. Now, if you look at cooking, well, I think I'll tick Nigeria on that. Did it make you hungry looking at all that food being cooked? Yeah, okay, so we can tick that one because, you know, rice isn't very edible unless it's cooked, okay? So cooking is actually very, very important historically for actually making, you know, human beings be able to eat and have the right nutrition. Then there's agriculture, and this is what we have our colleagues here trying to do, whether it's the size of farms, whether it's the fertilizer input, whether it's the right breed of plants, whether we're doing the right science, technology, research there to try and make sure that we have the right plants in the ground that are resistant to pests, for example, that can grow with the nutrients that we put into the ground. Getting all that agricultural picture right, I think, is a huge task before us, and it's an extremely complex one. I mean, at a routine level in terms of nutrients, right type of plants, the green revolution, all these sort of things that are rather, I don't know, they're in some sense off the shelf. But the difficult one, I think, you know, and it was interesting, the Commissioner raising this idea of clustering farms, you know, and how you do that, how you move from the handkerchief-sized farms to the larger farms, because there's huge social implications of that. And if you look historically, you know, where I come from, what happened is people were moved off the land. So you actually found, in terms of percentage, depopulation of rural areas. Is that something before you? How could that, if that's to take place and you move towards the mechanized farms that you saw on that video with the tractors, is that plausible? How do you do that? How do you organize it? How do you manage the social consequences of all of that? I'm very interested, you know, from the people who work on this, how that can be managed. So I think that whole issue of agriculture to be dealt with, you know, in terms of preservation and processing of food, I mean, a lot can be done there. I saw people smoking fish. This is how you preserve it. People dry. This is how stockfish exists, because you don't need a refrigerator because it's dried. People salt food. I imagine that takes place in certain places, and people refrigerate certain things, and people can food to preserve it. I suspect a lot more can be done in Nigeria. I came across a businessman the other day who'd bought a drying machine in South Africa, and he brought it here, and then he redesigned it for Nigeria, and he was drying cassava and yam and things like that, able to package it, and he was selling this machine, not only in Nigeria, but also in neighboring countries. So there's, you know, there's opportunities there. So, I don't know, there's huge task ahead, and I've just sort of the tip of the iceberg and how you handle all of that. But one of the big issues for me is how you handle that social transformation if you move from low productivity agriculture to high productivity agriculture.
Madam Furrer, it's estimated that Nigeria is going to reach about 450 million by 2050. We're still heavily dependent on imported food. It's clearly not sustainable. We need to do something about our processing as well. I mean, what is your take on what could happen or the potential if something isn't done about this? About the fact that we're importing so much food.
Once again, I'm going to give an example. I started my career in the 80s as an agricultural credit officer with the central bank. I'm talking about the 80s. At that time, we were at 1.8 tons per hectare maize, 2 tons per hectare maize. I believe we are still we have moved to 4 to 6. That means we have not been moving with our productivity. That means still there's a gap. It's a huge problem, And first of all, I wonder if really at that level of smallholder farmers, they are seriously aware of the impact on climate change on food security. I would argue that maybe at our level, yes, we all know, but at that level, there's still a lot of work to be done. And what I want to say, that I digress, is, well, we're beginning to have these conversations, we have these documentaries translated into various languages. A few days ago, I came across, is it Smallholder Farmers Radio in Anambra State, talking to them about climate change and, you know, improved agricultural practices. But there's a huge problem. And I still believe that while I think we can still go commercial with smallholder farmers, I'll leave that to, he's more of a professional, but I don't think we should worry much about wanting to move to large-scale farming if we organize our small-scale farmers. I'm not talking 1 hectare, maybe a little more than 1 hectare, but if we organize them well, it's about organization. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but really productivity needs to increase. We cannot keep up. We cannot be 450 million in 2050, and we're still talking about those levels of production, productivity, those levels of yield. Something needs to be done. I don't know what has been happening, to be honest. That's why I say sometimes we talk too much about the numbers, and yeah, I'm not grandstanding for ooh. No, really there's a problem. And you know, we talk too much. That's what I think. I know years back we've had a series of programs, agriculture, then our research institution, Sakawa 2000, I don't know what's happening, I know. So here we'll talk more on that. You know, trying to improve agricultural yield, maize. I still think, sorry to say, I still think government, I'm not going to blame government because I think it's a collective. We have responsibilities, but I think government still has a huge role in guiding, if I can say guiding us towards improved farming. Because the population in farming is so huge that we can't go it alone. There's something I also talk about once in a while. We're a huge population, and possibly, maybe we have to look to our geopolitical zones. For the purpose of this discussion, I will call them regions. You know, I think we should look towards regions working with their comparative advantage, because we're all not, it can't be a one-cap-fits-all, you know, so each region would have comparative advantage in terms of whether it's crop production, animal husbandry. Each region has comparative advantage, and possibly if this huge problem is broken down into smaller problems and addressed as such, it might help. I don't know if I make sense.
Thank you. Dr. Magri, again, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is looking at, we have a youth bulge. So we have, you know, and also looking at the fact, the idea of youth involvement, which you spoke about. Are there any policies or programs to get young people, or even just students in school, perhaps in their agri-science, you know, curriculum, to understand the different levels in the value chain to get them involved in agriculture, especially in parts of the country where, you know, there's a lot, farming is, of course, the main source of livelihood and production of food for the country in general. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing I wanted to talk to you was about processing. We have low productivity, we have lots of infrastructural issues, but we also have lots of wastage with food.
Okay, thank you. First, I would say that the greatest challenge agriculture has had has been government's approach to agriculture. From the 60s till today, government's approach to agriculture has been developmental. You get fertilizer, you pretend to give it to farmers for free. Somehow it doesn't even get to the farmers. And then the issues of regulation, and that takes us to another level. My personal opinion is that no farmer should get any input free, but what government should focus on is to develop an ecosystem that enables the free flow of quality inputs and guarantees access to premium markets. And until we do this, we will never get the flow of adequate private capital into agriculture. And agriculture will remain a black hole where no serious investor will put his money. For example, the first most important thing, like I have said, as part of the soft infrastructure that we need to do, is to develop standard economics of production. A farmer must know that I need to put 10 naira in a hectare to produce 5 tons of tomatoes, and these 5 tons of tomatoes will yield me 10 naira, for example. If you don't have economics of production well spelled out, standardized, as I said, no serious investor will put money in agriculture. And this is the challenge that the Anchor Borrowers Program that he mentioned had. We in Kaduna State are the only state that implemented a private Anchor Borrowers Program. Yet our repayment rate is only 32%, and is the best in the country. Yes. But for any serious financial institution, 32% is a failure. Yet, as I said, we are the best. So imagine that it was a commercial bank that funded the Anchor Borrowers Program and spent over 100 billion. That bank would have gone under. And then we sit down and we are surprised why banks will not fund agriculture. You can't qualify risk in agricultural investments. And once you cannot qualify the risk, insurance cannot come in. And no serious institution will give you funds for it. So this is the crux of the matter. Secondly, you talk about policy and regulation. As I said, I don't care if my farmers will have to buy a bag of fertilizer at 100,000 naira. But if they can put that fertilizer into use and make profit, I think we are in business. But if I give farmers fertilizer for free and they produce substandard and they cannot sell, what have I done? I've actually killed the industry. Let me give you an example. ShopRite and its sister retail supermarket chains across Nigeria today import vegetables alone to the tune of 1.8 billion naira daily. Daily, yeah, 1.8 billion naira. Caught me anywhere. Yeah. We produce tomatoes, we produce everything here, and we suffer post-harvest loss in the region of 60%. In fact, that is our greatest problem even, because even the little production that we are able to achieve, 60% of it is wasted. So why can't our own produce enter or access ShopRite? These standards are very poor. He is here from Europe. He doesn't want to go and buy carrots from ShopRite and get E. coli or salmonella. He wouldn't do it. Yeah. Do you understand? So, and then that takes us to good agricultural practices. And that's another soft infrastructure that nobody even thinks about or talks about. That leads us to certification. If you have GAP certification today, before you even farm, you get off-front contracts with payments 100%. And so how do we achieve this? It takes us back to what? Clusterization. Somebody may call it staple food processing zones or whatever, but that is it. Policy, as I said, is extremely important in achieving this. And let me just tell you a few things that Kaduna State Government has been able to do in the area of policy. When we came, the whole agricultural sector in Kaduna State had no policy at all. Imagine Kaduna State, which is can be rated as the food basket of northern Nigeria. We are the largest producers of maize, sorghum, tomatoes, ginger, name it, soya, yet there's no policy regulating the sector. So what have we been able to do? We took out critical sectors and we began to develop policies and regulations. I will take the first most important sector in agriculture, which is forestry. Because without forestry, without forest and vegetation, you can't even do the agriculture. He talked about the squeeze of desertification coming from the north. What we did is to adapt, to be able to develop a forestry policy and back it up with a law, because it didn't exist. And the law that governed forestry in Kaduna State is the 1935 law, forestry law of northern Nigeria. 1935, you can imagine. Next, we look at the livestock sector. And we saw that we had a huge potential in livestock. We can actually export meat to anywhere in the world because all the meat we produce here is largely organic and is well sought for all over the world. But our handling is very poor. Sanitation, hygiene is a problem. Like I said again, he wouldn't go to buy meat that he would give him psychosis. You understand? He has to be sure that the quality is guaranteed. All these are the issues. So we've been able to develop a policy on the livestock sector, and that policy has led us to the establishment of a livestock and livestock products agency, which is going to govern that sector. We've just finished a fisheries policy, and it's coming up with a law. We have just finished a draft agricultural investment plan, which is the first of its type in Nigeria, where prospective investors should be able to just look at a sector and say, whoa, this is where I want to key in and play. This is very important. Another thing that all around government, another problem that government has actually created is its inability to link research to commercialization. We have been able to, we are working very seriously with a few research institutes like NAPRI, the National Veterinary Research Institute in VOM, and other institutions. I've even written a memo to the Honorable Minister to that effect, and we are looking at bringing in investments to link up with these research institutes. In the case of NAPRI, you can imagine we have over 500 million chickens in Nigeria. We don't have a single breeder's farm. Anytime you want to produce chicks, you have to go to Europe or elsewhere to go and get parent stock and grandparent stock. This is unacceptable. You understand? NAPRI has been able to develop Shika Brown, a layer breed that is local, but it's not competitive. We have to find collaborations that will bring about technology transfer and make upgrade all that we have to be globally competitive. In the area of tomatoes, we are implementing a tomato cluster at Megana. I saw Mira Tomato Juice. She's key to it. We have found out that tomato farmers have to now go and buy seeds, then produce a nursery before they move those seedlings to plant. They are not experts. And they will never be able to produce good quality seedlings for transplanting. So now we've got Mira Tomato Juice to be producing quality seedlings, and we are selling them to each farmer at 10 naira for a seedling. So these are some of the things that we've been able to do. As I can see, the moderator is eyeing me.
Unfortunately, sir, we have very little time. Just before we go to the audience, Richard, very quickly, 60% post-harvest loss. We've talked about so we brought up so many.
Let me just say something on the 60% post-harvest loss. Sorry. As I speak to you, I have had to go back to my constituency, which is the Nigeria Agribusiness Group. And we're working very seriously to carry out a study and use that data to develop a structured market for commodities. I'm going to tell you, dry commodities such as just grains, that commodity market economy in Nigeria is worth over 10 trillion, but 70% of it is informal. It's not captured. Nobody even knows what is happening there. It happens informally. So government stands to make a lot more money by developing a structured economy. Probably we'll get back to the European Union. They seem to have money. They will help us. They will help us to do that study. We just also signed an MOU with the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce. We are looking at implementing 3 commodity industrial clusters. We are looking at tomatoes, we are looking at ginger, turmeric, and cassava. So quite a lot is being done, and we hope that after a few years, we will peak. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So with all the challenges that have been mentioned and the discussions that we've had, at the end of the day, agriculture, this is also a business. So we talk about investment, but people need to yield a profit as well. If we're hearing about all these losses, we're hearing about all these infrastructure challenges, we're hearing about lack of certain development as well, how are people going to invest in this sector if they cannot? And because it's also high yield investments. So how are they going to want to invest when they aren't quite sure they'll yield the returns?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
I'm not an investor. I think you should ask the businessman sitting next to me. I mean, look, I mean, there's a whole issue here that certain things that we would like to see happen are not happening. Okay, we talk about with, agricultural productivity, the right plants being planted, the correct use of the fertilizer, the correct preservation of food, the correct processing of food, the marketing of it, and ensuring the quality, ensuring it's of a standard to be exported. These are all things that we can sit on a platform and say we'd like to see happen. But something is stopping them from happening. And I have to say, I don't know what that thing is. Okay, what is the blockage here? What is the thing that's preventing it from happening? And I think the only way to really grasp that is to talk to the people who actually have money, who are interested in investing in farming, and ask them and really understand and diagnose the problems that they are facing, and then come up with the solution. Because I think we all have ideas in our mind, but ideas without money that you're willing to risk are not really ideas that you can carry forward. So those who have the money, who are willing to take the risk, I think we should talk to them.
I'm sure we can paint some utopic views here, but if there are any investors in the audience, please do let us know. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to emphasize on if anyone would like to make an investment in the agricultural sector, you should think about the value chain addition. And when you're doing it, please make sure that you select states that have specified other crops that they've chosen to grow in their various regions, such as, I'm going to market Kabafest State because I'm from Kabafest State, so we're doing a lot of rice. So please, if you're doing your rice, you shouldn't take it to Lagos, and you should expect us to carry rice from Kebbi to Lagos. You please bring it to Kebbi. You get to have access to the farmers, and then you can create jobs for the youths and the communities. You can reduce crime rates. You could provide a lot of so many other direct and indirect jobs to the people in the vicinity, and as well as there's a better option for you when you are going to have your factory and you have your inputs very close to you. So that's just one thing that I would like to mention.
Thank you. We're going to open it to the audience now. So I think we have a question, someone there. We're going to have to use this microphone. Okay,
good morning, everyone on the panel. I learned a lot today because I'm not very deft at agriculture anyway. But something caught my eye, this issue of clusterization that you mentioned earlier. Perhaps I didn't quite get what the term meant, definition-wise, but if you're bringing farmers together, then as you mentioned earlier, there's going to be the social consequence. And I'm a lawyer. 80% of litigation in Niger State, for example, is on land law. And there are interfamily issues with land. I I have a cousin whose cousin won't let him farm on, inherited pieces of land and so forth. So if we're clustering now, then there's going to be a quandary that maybe we didn't foresee. I'm not sure if you have, and if you have, are there any solutions to counter this? And as for technology in agriculture, there's this Verdant. I'm sure you know about Verdant. Nasir M. Mahmoud has done a lot of good work on it. It's an application that improves, it tells you what soil type to plant to, and so forth. So for those who are interested, you could just check Verdant. It's an app online. So just check Verdant, V-E-R-D-A-N-T. Thank you.
Well, I understand what you are saying, but naturally, there's always a price to pay for anything that is worth doing. What we have done, let me give you an example of the tomato cluster that we are implementing. We got a grant of, a support, let me say, of $1 million to implement a tomato cluster. And that support was facilitated by the government, but it was given to the Fadama farmers. And I told them, hey, they had an idea of where they wanted to do this cluster. And I told them, hey, we spend money to get you this money. Therefore, you cannot do it without us taking the glory. That's the government. So what I did is that I convinced the government to release Megana. That's the KADP headquarters. We have about 200 hectares of land there. And first, we are going to have the model seedlings nursery there for tomatoes. Second, we are going to have 500 farmers on those 200 hectares shared so that they are producing as a model, a demonstration for other farmers to do. But our cluster, the general cluster, cuts across 7 local governments around Zaria that produce tomatoes majorly. You understand what I'm saying? And therefore, all these people are just going to bring their land under that outgrower network, and so much value is already coming. For example, we have Technoserve giving us a cold storage facility. APM Terminals is giving us refrigerated trucks. You understand? And we are looking at a few other groups coming in with value. Our major target now is that we want to produce dry tomatoes because there's a huge market for dry tomatoes in Europe. You understand? Yes. So if you look at all these benefits, the issue of whether it was your cousin or not or this, it becomes secondary. But most importantly, we create a very strong leadership around the cluster where all members are taught about group dynamics management. That is, in other words, you're talking about conflict resolution. In human interactions, there will always be conflict, but you can always manage them, especially when the benefits outweigh the negatives. So I think, yes, it's a challenge everywhere, but it's a challenge that we can surmount. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to say something, not on this, but about the youth. My daughter is a farmer, by the way, sorry. She graduated, did her youth service, went into farming. In the morning, she hops onto her pickup and goes to her farm. Farming is, the future of farming is with our youth, who are like 60, 70% of the population. Now make it attractive for them, because they are more liable. We have an aging population, farming population. They would be more amenable to moving away from traditional practices that would still impact on the environment. So I think it should be made attractive to them, sensitize them, make it, why I'm putting us in the context of this book and arts festival. You know, we should publicize the fact that we have many youths among us farming, and it's attractive, and they can use simple tools that are not too expensive for them. I think the future is in the youths in agriculture. We can take probably 2 more questions.
one from that side and one from this side. Oh, there's a lady there just.
Thank you. I'm quite concerned about the direct linkage between food insecurity and conflict. And when you look at the conflict in the Northeast region, which I'm quite particular about, you see how food has really been affected. Farmers can no longer go to their farm because of the Boko Haram insurgency, which we don't need to go into the details. Now, I know no one is from the Northeast region here, but what would you advise, or what can be done now that we have IDPs going back to their region and they've always been doing farming? What do you advise that can be done such that would quickly resuscitate agriculture in that region and help them in post-conflict reconstruction? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm involved partly as a volunteer with the Refugees Commission, and I give them technical advice on a few things. And part of the concept of reconciliation that I have been able to contribute is the fact that we need to realize that livestock is the current asset on every farmer's balance sheet. In other words, for every rural player in the rural economy, livestock is his current asset. People sell crops and they buy livestock and keep. When I was growing up, my mother had more than 50 pigs, for example, in the house. If you needed money, you just needed to catch a pig and sell. We had goats in excess of 20. We just needed money, you catch a goat or a chicken and sell. But today, part of the reason why there's mass poverty all over is because people have departed from that. And the whole idea is like thinking that you are now elitist. You understand? And it has taken us just backward. What we have done, I propose a cockerel intervention for those that are returning. And what we are looking at is you just get, for every household registered, you give them 10 cockerels. When they get back there, they will just release them in the open. And those cockerel, we brood them for like 8 weeks so that they've gone past the critical stage. When they take them there, they just release them in the open, and in 5 months, they have something to live on. We also have, I also propose goat intervention. For every community, you give every household 2 goats, 2 female goats. And then for every 20 female goats, you have 1 male. Yes, that will serve the females. So when they come on heat, you have a common. No, it's scientific, you know. Oh yeah. So what you do is that anytime the female goats are on heat, the male serves them. And within the shortest possible time, you will be shocked at the rate at which people will stabilize. You understand? These are a few among the things that we have proposed. And I think that is the way forward. That is just the way forward. Thank you.
Okay. That will be our last question. Yep, thank you.
2 quick comments. The first one is to do with investment in agriculture and making agriculture a completely private sector-driven enterprise. I am concerned that we don't understand that food security and national security are one and the same thing. And this idea that you can let the market to completely take or dictate what happens in agriculture, I think is dangerous. Even the biggest capitalist countries in the world, like the United States, and I dare say at some point probably in Europe, farmers were subsidized. And they were subsidized for a reason. And so therefore, for me, the question is that bridging that gap between where we are now to get into where agriculture can then become this viable enterprise where the market can then begin to dictate what happens. In between, there must be some sort of intervention. That is my view, because the consequences are too dire, as we have seen with the impact of the shrinkage of the Lake Chad and what has happened in the northeast, which has directly fueled the Boko Haram crisis. So that's number one. Then the second thing is, I was in the Mambila Plateau a few months ago, traveling in the hills. And the conflict there has a direct link to land. And what we found is that it is estimated that up to 70% of the land in the Mambila Plateau, which is high-yielding, very productive land, is in the hands of generals. And so the people of the Mambila, between the farmers and the ranchers, are left with something like 30% of the land. Now, of that 30%, this particular government is working on building the Mambila Dam. I'm sure a few of you have heard about that. And there's a lot of excitement about what it will do for power. Nobody is talking about the social consequences, because a lot of farms are going to be drowned by that dam. And what happens is that the land that is already in dispute is going to shrink even further. And so when we talk about these interventions, we cannot dismiss the social issues, like the Deputy Ambassador pointed out, because at the end of the day, this is about people and this is about conflict. Whatever we do, if it does not make life better for the majority of our people, we're really just wasting our time.
Yeah, can I say something about what Kadria has said? I totally agree with Kadria. For example, the Mambila Power Project, I don't know, but that's why I keep on talking about research. There should have been an impact assessment done to see what the consequences will be subsequently, and then plans to mitigate any problems that will arise in the future. I don't know if that has been done. It probably has been done because it's a huge project. But yes, but often, even where there's research, where there's a study, subsequently, that study, even if at the outset it's said that it will, determine whatever policies there would be, are usually not looked at afterwards. Even if they're not looked at afterwards, implementation is just, implementation is just not followed by the book according to the plan that originally was. And I think that's one major problem we have. And in terms of subsidies, sorry, I might sound like a socialist or whatever, but I totally agree with Kadria. Initially, for some time, there needs to be some support. I actually agree with that.
Right. And thank you very much. We have come to the end of the panel. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you so much to the wonderful panelists, Dr. Manzo Maigari, to Madam Furera Jumare, Wana Odobang, Mr. Richard Young, and Haruna Hassan Tukur, a name to remember. And I just want to say, because Sterling Bank is one of our sponsors, I happen to know that they have, through an anchor borrower scheme that they introduced in Kebbi State, they've been able to support 20,000 farmers. So this is another reason to open a Sterling Bank account. They are there. Go there. Go and open your accounts. Please, I want to hit my targets. I need to hit my target, and my target is 200. Please, Kaduna people, don't let me down. I beg. So we're going to go straight into the next panel. Would you stand, please, for your group photo?